Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here at That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm sure you're all excited because of the panel of people that we have here tonight. Andy and Cami are back for another discussion with myself. So, guys, I hope that you are doing very well.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, yes, I am good. Glad to see you both.
Yes. So we are back to discuss Batman. We are now officially into the final quarter of 2024, and we want to make sure that we end this 85th anniversary celebration of Batman with a bang. So we've got this is the first of the three last Batman projects that we have for this year, and we wanted to make sure that they were all true landmark discussions about iconic pieces of Batman lore. And now that we're in the middle of October, and I know that Cami is probably the most excited person in the room because Halloween is just a couple of weeks away.
So it is hot as Hades, and it does not feel like October right now.
It started to feel very much like fall, but today I went from Philadelphia back to New York, and when I was leaving Philadelphia, they were saying that it was going to be 77 degrees that today. And I'm like, no, can't, no.
Well, it was 107 here today, so.
You live in Arizona.
Yes, but in all fairness, everybody in the United States should at least get 1 month that actually feels like the month you're supposed to be in. Like, give me my October, please. I mean, I get the dead leaves, but when you swelter the heat, it really doesn't feel like fall now, does it?
I mean, tomorrow they say that up where I am, and Andy is about 30 minutes away from me, they're anticipating a much cooler day tomorrow, which I'm just happy to take a look at the 10-day forecast moving forward, though that could change on a dime, but they're anticipating all of the lows in the next couple of days to get into the mid to lower 40s. So I'm like, okay, it's finally happening. Here we go. But anyway, in the spirit of Halloween, we figured that if we were going to talk about Batman, there's only one iconic standout Batman series that comes to mind when it comes to making you feel very, very uncomfortable. And no, we've already read Arkham Asylum, but anyway, there's the other one. I said this to Cami before the camera started rolling. If you're going to put 10 Batman fans up in a room and you're going to ask each and every one of them, what do you think is the greatest Batman story of all time? I would probably say at least half of them are going to mention Alan Moore's very well-known masterpiece, Batman the Killing Joke, with beautiful artwork done by Brian Bolland and incredible inking and coloring done by John Higgins. So let me just say another thing before we get into this conversation, because Cami knows this, Andy, you don't. I said to Cami, I have no idea how I'm even going to discuss this with you guys, because this is such a story that sits with you, and I also have to eat my shoe to a certain degree, because a few videos back I talked about how it's not that easy to sit a bunch of people in a classroom setting and have a true analytical discussion on Batman, possibly outside of Arkham Asylum. I think that The Killing Joke is something that you can have a discussion about, because I really am curious to know at the end of this conversation what each of you individually think that this story truly is about.
Yeah, I barely know where to start with this one. And it is, I mean, I think the best way to start is to say, I agree, Steve, that like a solid chunk of 10 random Batman fans in a room are probably going to point to this one as being the best Batman story. Certainly, if you ask them the best Joker story, more than half of them will probably come up with this one. But it's interesting. I'm going to draw a point of comparison here to Arkham Asylum just because it's one that we've also talked about and is also like a very, thought-provoking, rich, but one-shot Batman story. Um, it's it's compelling in a different way. This feels much more like a traditional narrative to me than Arkham Asylum did. Arkham Asylum was such a visual art piece, and kind of going through like this very emotional driven like series of scenes, whereas Killing Joke is, for all intents and purposes, a pretty simple Batman versus Joker story. Like you can sum it up in two or three sentences pretty effectively. You would just miss all of the depth of it in doing so. But it's interesting to me how easy to follow it is,
It's very
right?
short.
Yeah, yeah, there's that, of course, but what sticks out to me about The Killing Joke is, and this is going to be such a weird thing to say, but it's really accessible. Like I think most people could read The Killing Joke and be like, that was an interesting story that I took a lot from. I understand these characters and I'm glad to have read that. Despite any like darkness in it, the like difficulty with certain sections, that sort of thing. But like just in terms of being able to pick it up, read it, understand what you read, get the characters, and have thoughts on it. It's like a very accessible book, which is shocking.
Well, that's the
Um,
truth, because if you really think about it, Andy, I'm sorry for cutting you off. I just want to
no,
add
you're
to
not.
that. You talk about where we are right now in the world of comic books, and people who haven't picked up comic books at all, they're going to know these famous names in the world of superheroes and supervillains. Like, you go to people who have never picked up a comic book, they're going to tell you, oh, I know Spider-Man, I know Superman, I know the Joker, I know Magneto. Like, they know these characters because the comic book film has made the world of comics more accessible. So it's one of those scenarios where you can actually tell someone, hey, you want to read a Batman story and you've never read a Batman story before in your life and you love Batman, read this. It's very much a standalone. It's really not necessarily connected to anything in the comics. You just have to go into the story. You got to know who Batman, Commissioner Gordon, Batgirl, and the Joker are, and to a certain degree, Alfred too. And there you go. Just enjoy the story for what it is. You might feel a little discomfort after you read it because it's very complex, but at the same time, it's also the name that's attached to this book. It's Alan Moore. And a lot of people who have never picked up a comic book, who don't read comics religiously, a lot of people have read Watchmen. So people who have read Watchmen, and Cammy, here's a booktube nod right here. People who know the authors of certain books that they like, they'll go and read other things that those authors wrote. So people who love a story like Watchmen, whether they like comic books or not, he's one of those names that people will want to hunt down and read more of his material.
Especially something like this that Andy said is, readily accessible and very short. It's something that you can kind of just say, hey, what else is out there by this particular author? And it's a completely different take.
So here's the thing. I got a lot of random shit I could say about this story. So it's a little difficult for me to know where I already said, where do I start with this? Then I started. Now I'm going to say again, where do I start with this? And my question is now, I'm curious for both of you, which version did you read? Because with this one, it actually matters a lot, because since the deluxe version printing, there's two colorizations of this.
Yeah.
I read
Yeah.
the Absolute edition, which happens to have both printings in it. So I love this story so much, and I was so invested in it, and it's so short that I just read both because I had time, whatever. Um, but I was curious about you guys, what you guys read for the.
I picked up the easiest one that I could find. I mean, the funny thing is, when I read this book for the very first time back in 1995, I actually read a friend's copy of the original printing. So I didn't even realize this whole thing. As a matter of fact, before the cameras went on, Cammy was telling me about this as well. So yeah, I have the deluxe edition. That's the one with the new coloring. There's a
Mhm.
great introduction here by, and I'm also really happy that I'm mentioning this person's name because he's no longer with us. And that, of course, is the great artist Tim Sale. By the way, everybody, if you love The Long Halloween, Jeff Loeb has officially started the Batman The Long Halloween, The Last Halloween. Issue number 1 just came out last week, and it is phenomenal. And every cover in that book, every A cover is a Tim Sale work of art. And even if you pick up other variants, I'm actually picking up the B covers, which are mugshots of all of these Batman characters in every issue, done by the special artist that is doing each separate issue. But at the end of each book is the Tim Sale A cover if you didn't buy the A cover. So yeah, there's an introduction from Tim Sale, and there's an epilogue written by one of my personal favorites, and I would probably want to say one of a favorite of everybody in this room, Mark Waid.
So I actually have both as well, Andy. I don't know if we have the same version. I have the 30th anniversary edition. And
Yep,
I
that's
bought
the
this
one.
mostly for the cover and the artwork because you have an awesome slip cover that has this artwork followed by, one of the pictorials in the comic itself. But once you take it out, you just get this really cool double version of both sides of the Joker. And after reading Higgins information about how he colored and all the thought process that went behind the coloring and stuff, I found it very interesting that when he actually went to create this, he took a picture of himself in the mirror, and this pose right here where you have both thumbs on the camera was a mistake, but he loved it so much he wanted to ensure that it got in here. So I mean, it's just little tidbits like that that I absolutely love. But I'm so happy, Andy, that you mentioned the coloring, because before the camera started rolling, that's what I was telling Steve, is that the first copy that I picked up obviously was the newer version of the coloring, but I honestly think that the original coloring is so much better. I think that it tells the story in such a different way, and it's really strange because I've never looked at coloring in that way before until this story, that how something is colored can actually change your perception of the characters and the story and the setting and the feeling. And I just feel like it's told so much better in its original color palette, and the original color palette is just that basic color, this sienna, the magenta, the yellow, the black. It's very basic. It reminds me, I was telling Steve of, remember when we were kids and we did the watercoloring and you had one brush and you brushed all the colors together? It really feels like that, but it works so well for me here. And I don't know, I mean, of course you can appreciate the story. I was told that there is one also variation in the text in the actual script itself from the original to the newer version. I couldn't find it though. I didn't see any difference in the storyline, so maybe I'll have to read it again for a fourth time just to see, if I can find that variation. But I just think the coloring really speaks volumes in both editions.
Yeah, yeah. I will mention I don't know. I'm aware of that too. I don't know off the top of my head what the difference is in the script. I will say I know that there were changes made to the line work in the art when doing the deluxe edition as well. Very few of them. But in addition to the color changing, it was an opportunity to go back and redraw very specific frames. So it's fun to kind of flip back and forth like an A to B. There's very few of them, but like you can pick up on it. But that's more of a finesse and modernization thing than it was like a changing of meaning at any point. Whereas the color, it's really interesting. I don't even know what I like better. But I think they both serve to spotlight different elements of the story. I think the original coloring is very much emotion of the scene because it's very washed in like color. It's very, I mean, it's vibrant, except it never reads to me as like rainbow or bright, right?
Right.
It reads as just bathing the scene in the color, the emotion of the choice. Whereas the updated version, the deluxe version, I also do like, um, and I think primarily for the way that its lack of color then uses color to spotlight elements of the panel. That because I have read the deluxe edition now, when I read the original, I have in my mind's eye what is spotlighted still, so like I don't lose that anymore. Um, so anyway, I mean this to say just it's good to know what everyone's familiarity is with that side of it, to know what we were looking at and looking at primarily, because I don't have a strong feeling on which I like better, but like they definitely bring something different to the table.
There's also like a Where's Waldo moment between the original and the newer version, where there's one character when the Joker is sitting with the two gangsters in the bar, that there is some characters behind them kind of causing some chaos behind the bar. One of those characters appears in the original and does not appear in the remake, so that's kind of like a Where's Waldo thing. So I thought that
Huh.
was kind of cool.
Yeah, I didn't notice that one, but that's the kind of redrawing thing that's interesting to catch. Yeah.
So the story itself is definitely a snapshot in time in the world of Batman. It's a very dark moment in the Batman lore. And this is where I guess I will give you guys my thoughts on what do I truly feel this story is about. And what I really feel is I do agree with you, Cammy. I do feel that this is more of a Joker heavy story than it is a Batman story. I mean, clearly because of the fact that we get Joker's origins to a degree, and I'll definitely want to touch on a little bit about that later. But I feel for me, in regards to this story, that this is the Joker's ultimate test for Batman because they've been at it for many, many years. The intro of the book, even though it's Batman that's saying it rather than the Joker, he says, we've been down this road, we've done this dance so many times. One of us is going to kill each other one day. The question is how and when. And I feel that the Joker, if there's anything that he truly wants to do when it comes to defeating Batman, I think Joker's ultimate goal is to get Batman to break his code. I think that that is Joker's ultimate goal because, look, he doesn't want to kill Batman. That's one of the few things that I can definitely say. And I'm not quoting the Heath Ledger version of the Joker from the Nolan films. The Joker truly loves Batman in some sick and twisted way. To lose Batman would destroy his world because he'll have nothing left to fight for. So I really do believe that this is the story that Alan Moore wanted to write for the purposes of doing what he does best. I think this is definitely a deconstruction of the superhero, possibly even a deconstruction of the supervillain, if you will. And he wanted to give us something that the Joker could do that could be so vile. But this is something a little different, a little darker, a little more twisted. Because I've said this very, very limited times in conversations with other people. But when someone does something in this world that is absolute evil, you don't want that person to die because that's the easy way out. You want that person to live as long as possible, knowing what this person has done, and just let him stew with that in solitary for the rest of his life. I think that that is a fate worse than death.
I think that's what makes it so sinister here, though, is the fact that we know it's kind of like a repetitive cycle with the Joker. The Joker can't go to a regular prison. We know he's going to go to Arkham Asylum. We know he's going to continuously break out of Arkham Asylum. So it's just like, what menace, mayhem is he going to do next? And so the crazy thing is he doesn't want to kill Batman. Batman doesn't want to kill him. It's like they feed off of each other in this frenzy. But in the same regard, going off of what you just said, it's like, how many times are we going to continue to play the game of madness? How many times are we going to continue to put the Joker away only to know that he at some point will escape And if he could do this to Barbara Gordon here, else is he capable of? It's like he just continues to reach these insane levels of sinister, and every time he's allowed to reach this level of evil, I just can't stand him, and I love him, and I don't want to love him, and it constantly bears the morality question: what is wrong with me? Like, why am I so drawn to this sadistic man? But he is pure evil, and I think if anything that this story does for us as a reader is proves that there's no ounce of good in this man. He is just straight sadistic. He is crazy, he is psychotic, and there is no fixing him, and he's okay with that.
That's what I was trying to get at. I was trying to get a little bit deeper outside of the person doing the evil deed and not told to die, but told to live. That's what he does in a certain degree to Barbara. He shoots her not to kill her. Because that's the big triggering moment, excuse the pun here, but he basically just surprises Jim Gordon and Barbara in his apartment, and he just shoots Barbara in the spine, point blank range, crippling her. And then his next goal is to kidnap Jim. And as I've said in previous stories, here we go again. Jim Gordon gets the raw end of the stick here, poor Jim. And he wants to basically turn Jim, Bruce's, aka Batman's, true confidant next to Alfred. He wants him to be just as crazy as he is. And how he goes about it is absolutely gruesome and unforgiving. So to go in this route, not just being truly evil and Batman not wanting to kill him, but the fact that Joker doesn't even want to kill these victims for the purposes of having Batman go over the edge and break his code. He wants these people to live, he wants them to be miserable, and he wants Batman to live in a world where the people who he truly cares about are people that just want to die. And I think that that is one of the most sinister things that the Joker can ever do.
It is a true testament, though, to the strength of Gordon's mind and the fact that, everything that he was put through, all of the not only embarrassing things that he was put through, but the just nobody should have to view photographs of their daughter in that
Yeah.
capacity. Nobody should have to be subjected. I mean, that in itself turned my stomach. I was just like, really, did we have to go there? I mean, but it is in a way necessary because we are trying to show the dark and sadistic side of the Joker in this case, and that's pretty much primeval right there. But it just goes to show that some people can't be broken, some people do have a very strong mind, some people do have a very strong will despite the things that they go through. So I think as much emphasis on the breakdown of mental health on the side of the Joker, I think that it equally constitutes that there are some strong-willed mental wins in this particular storyline too, on the side of Commissioner Gordon. I mean, who goes through something like that and comes out the other side just saying, let's just throw the book at him, let's do this by the book. I mean, most dads would be like, string him up, but he just didn't have that same drive to fight back the way that the Joker was fighting with him.
Nothing you guys said is at all wrong, or in my sense, at all controversial. I think that the idea that there's a surface level idea here, which is one bad day. And the story is, quote unquote, as simple as, if Joker gives Commissioner Gordon one bad day, watch how he breaks. Oh, look, he didn't break. The Joker's wrong. But like, this is a story about Batman and the Joker, right? And like, to me, when Joker says, you had a bad day once, am I right? He's right. Um, And that's, I mean, the core of the story being the dichotomy between Batman and the Joker. It's I'm pulled to the beginning and the end of the story. So in the very beginning of the story, it's the entire frame is that Batman comes in, came to talk, want to talk about us. And the thing that sticks with me is I just wanted to know that I'd made a genuine attempt to talk things over and avert that outcome of them killing each other just once. You know, and then when Joker says at the end, when Batman's like, it doesn't have to be this way, you know, referencing that could rehabilitate you. It's like Batman saying that essentially to actually the Joker this time at the end. It reminds him of a joke, right? And it's in that summation of Joker's joke, the killing joke at the end, that there's truth to be found in what the Joker is talking about in Batman's bad day. It's that Batman is just as crazy as the Joker for reaching out that hand. Because, like Cami, you were talking about the cycle and the absurdity of the cycle of Joker breaking out and all of this. It's that Batman's attempt to avert that outcome at least once is literally as crazy as shining a light that someone can walk across, right? Batman's outreached hand trying to act like he can rehabilitate the Joker at all in the context of their broader relationship outside of the story and in the context of these pages, he's just as crazy from a different way. And that's where I land with the most important part of the story and what it's about, is that it's putting a lens on the absurdity that you point out with Joker will break out. What does he have to do? Pushing him to the limit. How bad does it get? All that. It is inherently absurd that that cycle will continue forever. And the only answer to that absurdity is that Batman is insane, just with his own brand of it. And maybe Joker wanted to prove it through Jim Gordon. Maybe Joker's brand of crazy, he didn't realize he had already proved himself to be right, but he proved himself to be tangentially right. It's like taking a step to the side. He got it correct, if not stepping forward. He understood the nature of the relationship with Batman better than Batman understood it, for sure.
I don't know. I think, okay, so referencing the very end of the story, the joke, and the fact that Batman laughs does tell you that there is a sinister part of Batman that sometimes we don't see, but I think we know that. I think inherently, if you are a fan of the Bat, you always reference back to why is he doing this to begin with, and we know it's because he had a huge tragic event that forever changed the path of his life, and he's living a vigilante life. So in a way, I think that as readers, because we are inherently reading for the greater good of the story, we want it to end well, we are on the side of the hero. We do think in some intrinsic way Batman can save all of these lunatics, and that's going on every villain platform. But I think especially when it comes to the Joker, I think there is this kind of slice of life relationship that they have, that it's like it's that back and forth that I always say, one does not exist without the other. If either or was to kill the other would cease to exist, because the other would have nothing left, really. I mean, we can sit here and we can say, oh well, the Batman has all these other villains, but does he really care to the same degree about those other villains that he does, and the effort that he puts in to capturing and understanding and trying to help the Joker? No. I think what's really hard as a reader for me, though, is to see how dark this is, but not so much for some of the content and the actions of the Joker, but just how intrinsically sad and disturbed he is as a person. The whole, I mean, to say that this is an origin story is really neither here nor there for me, because it's like, even he kind of says in the beginning, it's like, yeah, so this bad thing happened to me, but I can't even remember, so it doesn't even matter. And as to us, the reader, it doesn't even matter either. It doesn't matter what led him here. The fact is he's here. But now, knowing how sad his beginning was, it only makes every action after that even more sad. And it just breaks my heart that knowing Batman is never going to help him. He's never going to be fixed because he's not fixable, because he is so content with his depression and his sadness that he's always just going to look for the next laugh to feel alive.
There's also the scene where the Joker comes and pays a visit to the Gordons and shoots Barbara and takes Jim. And it's definitely the most iconic moment in the book for me because of certain reasons. It's, of course, the way he's dressed. He looks like he's on vacation. He's got the camera on him, he's got the Hawaiian shirt, he's got his purple hat, and he says that last line. And that's it. I gotta be honest, I'm still trying, even to this very day, to piece together what that last moment, and that is when Barbara's struggling to basically breathe, and she asks him, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "To prove a point, here's to crime."
Mhm.
It's like, is that a message to Batman? Or is it just the Joker giving himself a random moment of free expression? You know, it's a very it's a moment that can be looked at and deconstructed on so many levels, and I personally do not know how to reconstruct that.
It's just the message of a madman. Anybody who does sadistically sinister things is always going to have a reason why. And the reason why doesn't inherently have to make sense to anybody else. And I think, given the fact that the Joker had a beginning in which he essentially forgot the why behind the beginning. I mean, he obviously falls into a vat of chemicals, which can completely changes his makeup of his mind, making him this sinister being. But let's be frank, he was already depressed. He was already kind of mad in the beginning. Look at the way he spoke to his spouse. Look at the way he dealt with just normal everyday things. I mean, he wasn't quite right in the head even before he was introduced to these chemicals. So that said, when he says that to Barbara, I don't see that as any other thing as to, you could ask any serial killer, you could ask any school shooter, you can ask any criminal the why behind the action, and it doesn't matter because the action happened. And really, that's what we focus on. We focus on the aftermath, the healing, the rebuilding, the how do we move forward beyond this? How is she going to move forward beyond this? She's now paralyzed. This is going to forever change the genetic makeup of who she is, how she lives her life, the choices she can make, the things she can and can't do now. So it doesn't really matter why, because even if he tells you the reason why, it's not going to change the outcome. So I forever get very confused as to why people interview serial killers, and for the notion of the why doesn't matter. And even if we know the why, it's not going to change the how, the because, the aftermath, the none of it. This is why I don't put a lot of weight into true crime when it comes to serial killers and mass murderers, because I don't want to give them the attention and the glorification, because at the root of it, that's really why they do what they do. If we didn't put all this emphasis and weight from the media standpoint into school shooters, I can guarantee you we wouldn't have as many as we do today. They want that 15 minutes of fame. They want to be the next name in the headlines. They want to be that little shit that sits and in the defense seat, and it's like, oh, look what I did. Who gives a shit why you did it? The fact that you did it, and the fact that you've now forever changed the lives of however many people you've chosen to take out of this world, that's what we care about. I don't give two shits about the why. So I'm sorry, I don't give the Joker the glorification in that moment. He changed Barbara's life. He changed Commissioner Gordon's life in that moment. And he did it simply for the fact of he could. And that's shitty. That's a really shitty thing to do, but that's evil at its core. It doesn't matter why they do it just because they can.
But it has an impact then on Batman, regardless, in that, well, the why doesn't necessarily matter. We do get to see an outcome from Batman at the end, which is the light goes out, right? So there's an insane attempt to see if it can be talked through, to see if the Joker can be rehabilitated, which is patently crazy to try to do, as seen through how heinous the Joker's actions are in this book. And we reach the point where the light goes out. I mean, literally, the final panel of the book is the beam of light going out. And this book, there's to just like, I think it's important to note that there's debate over like how canon the book is to like
Yeah,
the
I want to
Batman
bring that up a
character
little bit later,
mythos.
actually.
But yeah. But I will say, obviously, there's at least a little bit of canon because like Barbara is paralyzed. Like that's like a real thing that then came into the comics and came from it. But there's an artfulness to that ending and an ambiguity to the ending that allows for it to be completely in its own work and allows us to talk about the ending purely as this book outside of the rest of the broader Batman mythos. So that's what I'm doing is my lengthy introduction to what I'm about to say now, which is I think Batman gives up on the Joker at the end of this book. I don't think Batman gives up on the Joker in the broader Batman mythos. And I think Alan Moore understood that in writing it, that he's commenting on the absurdity of the cycle, and we're seeing it. But I think within the context of this book and with the ambiguity of how the ending is presented, it was able to get through DC. I think that the story of this book is maybe Batman has another bad day here and something changes, that the cycle is broken. But Batman definitely laughs because he's made to see the absurdity of it. So anyway, this is a lengthy on ramp to get to. Cammy, well, I agree with you. I think the one thing that's important is if it's not the why that necessarily mattered, it's that the outcome still matters. And I know we agree on that, right? But I think the outcome matters in the context of this story with Batman as well. But obviously to Jim and to Barbara primarily. But just in the direction that Alan Moore was going, to have something to analyze here, I think it's important to talk about it in the context of Batman too. But that's all I mean to say. I think that's additive, not reductive of what you said.
I just find it rich how, despite his multiple escapes from Arkham Asylum and how he's murdered multiple people in cold blood just for the joke of it all, that he never seems to murder Batman or Commissioner Gordon, and he can. He's had plenty of opportunities to do that, and that would forever change the course of not only the stories that would follow, but the course of the lives, and how the loss of Batman would affect Gordon and how the loss of Gordon would affect Batman. But we never see that because, again, the Joker is keeping them alive because it gives him life. And so, I do see all of your points there, Andy, and I definitely think that there is a lot of weight that comes in that final joke. And I do think that it is kind of an awakening moment for both Batman and Joker in those moments. But again, it brings a lot of sadness in my heart for the Joker because even through the jokes, you can feel the pain.
Yeah. I was about to give a little bit more of my piece in regards to something that you said earlier, Cammy, about how, they can't live without each other. I was going to mention something from The Dark Knight Returns, and I said, no, we're going to wait until we talk about that book because it's a very interesting and very powerful moment. But anyway, so the origin story to a certain degree is in this book as well. This was, I think, one of the very first times we ever actually got some kind of a Joker origin story. And leave it to Alan Moore to do it in such a beautiful way because even though it is an origin story, he still keeps the Joker's identity anonymous. And I find that absolutely genius. I mean, I know it sounds like a broken record because I've said before the cameras went on way too many times today. Cammy and I were talking about the fact that there have been so many incarnations of the Joker in which his origin includes an actual alias And I appreciate the fact that we still don't know who this character's real name is, even after this. Also, I believe this is also the very first time we were introduced to the Red Hood, which I thought was pretty cool. I mean, unless I'm completely wrong about that. But I think that how the origin story plays into this book as a whole and why it's there is to basically not only show the Joker going down the dark path, but the fact that he's going down the dark path because he's basically, you said this earlier about Batman, Andy. I think because he's pretty much given up. Like, he has just had multiple bad days. He's not making enough money. He doesn't feel that he's worthy of his wife and future child. So he goes to the world of crime to try and give a better life to his family. And even that doesn't seem to work because they look at him as an insignificant fly, something that's never going to amount to anything. The fact that they're going to give him these dangerous jobs because he's nothing but a pushover, a lackey, someone that if he dies today, nobody's going to care about him tomorrow. And the fact that he is given that opportunity to die and he survives. And it's that moment when he takes off the hood and he sees, I didn't die, and my life is no better. My life is never going to be any better. So I'm 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 gone. I'm somewhere else now. I'm in a place that I will never come back to the real world from. And that's
But
the Joker.
I think it happened even before that moment where he took the hood off, because he made the realization coming out of the bar, my wife is dead, my unborn child is dead. There's nothing I have to live for. The whole reason why I was even going into this job was to support them, because I'm a nobody and I have nothing to offer them. And then it was like, well, shit, now I got nothing left to lose because I got nothing left to live for. And I honestly think that had those two hoods not got shot, they probably would have offed him because he was just a patsy. But as the story
I think it's just
that's
obviously
really,
we need the Joker around.
That's really interesting. And I the way you phrase that, Steve, is like really sitting with me, that like he had his opportunity to die. And I think you're exactly right, Cammy, that he lost everything to live for in that moment before the robbery, where he learned that his wife and unborn child were gone. But then what's really sitting with me now is you're right, Steve. He had the opportunity to die, and it's almost like in that opportunity to die, and he doesn't. He's left with less than nothing, right?
right.
It's like not only does he have nothing to live for, he has nothing to die for. He's basically nothing. It makes him, and like we know that the Joker is this fantastic, like foiled Batman, this like true complete antagonist that like we see in pop culture as like the villain of villains, right? And I think that that's a beautiful way of thinking about it. Beautiful might be a weird word, but a beautiful way of thinking about it, Steve, which is the less than nothing that he then represents after
And
losing everything and then some.
right.
Yeah.
And Cammy, I just want to go back to what you said. No, you are absolutely right. He lost everything before, but it's the fact that he survived something completely extraordinary and completely unnatural. And he emerged from that moment completely unnatural. And that's why I mentioned that's where he basically realized it, because he's like, I just fell into a fucking tank of acid. And what happened to me? My skin is bleach white and my hair is green. I am nothing but a clown. I think that's really what it is. And I think, but you know what that is? That's comic books for you.
It's also a baptism.
Yes, exactly.
Like it just, that's comic books, yes, but it's also it's a rebirth and a loss of everything, right?
Way to get religious during the high holidays, my friend.
Oh yeah, right. No, but I mean truly, and that's there, right? So the reason I say it is it's not totally kooky to make that connection, like that's really there, because it is a rebirth. And also I will say, to go to like the beginning of this thread of the conversation, right? not just do I love that the Joker is still left anonymous in this, but obviously, and now I put down the book, so I won't have the exact words, but beyond that, the Joker remains an unreliable narrator in this because he says if he's going to have a past, he prefers it to be multiple choice. So not only are we left with thinking we don't know who this person was who we're seeing this flashback of, but Alan Moore intentionally undercuts our ability to say that what we saw was the Joker's backstory, or it's how he chooses to remember it that day. Or maybe these details are the details he's sharing with us, the reader, in order to give it a baptism moment that wasn't there the first time, right? But there's the way we talk about the Joker in this story and other stories is that kind of primordial force of evil. And I think that ambiguity about the history and that kind of like birth that we get to see of this thing, this entity that's no longer human, but it's more of an idea of the darkness. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think Alan Moore did a really good job in writing this story.
No, he
It's that
definitely
simple.
did.
Yeah.
He
But
definitely did.
that definitely speaks to the point that you said in the beginning, Steve, is that I do feel that this type of story has multiple interpretations, and Andy always has a very eloquent way of taking your brain thoughts and my brain thoughts and mushing them together and making them both make sense. And even if we don't always agree, he finds the commonality between us. And so you finding the birth moment of the Joker and his new life in that moment, and me seeing it beforehand, they're both perfectly logical and that they both make sense. I think that these types of stories are beautiful for that, and the fact that they are shorter stories and you can pull so much from them really speaks to the power of the writing of these stories, and just the how we started off in the beginning talking about the coloring impacts. I mean, who would have thought that a color palette could speak to you in such a way? So I think that, for the sake of being a legendary story, I definitely think this is one that will last the tell of time because of the multiple interpretations, the darkness, the richness, and how much it managed to speak to a multitude of people across a multitude of platforms in such a small amount of pages. And that's why we're still talking about it now, some 30 plus years later.
Exactly. I mean, we then get to the climax and the end of the story, and it's also a very interesting thing to me because one of the few things that I personally would have expected from an event like what happened to Barbara and what was happening to Jim when Batman finally finds Jim and rescues him, you would expect to see Batman come down on the Joker with the fury of 1,000 suns. But the fight is very light, it's very brief, it's not extremely intense. And I think it plays back to where we started with the story, where Batman is flat out tired of this. He's just sick and tired of doing this rigmarole, this runaround, and he basically just, the fight just stops and it just goes with the two of them talking. And that's when the final moment takes place. And it's when Joker is reminded of the joke. And he tells Batman the joke.
I don't think in that moment that was about Batman. I think that was about Batman respecting Commissioner Gordon's request to throw the book at him, to keep it by the
That
book.
too.
And I really feel that given everything and I don't even think Batman fully had embodied the full picture of what Commissioner Gordon had just went through with the Joker, and that was really neither here nor there. I mean, they just had a very small conversation between the two of them, and it was like, I need you to do this for me. And so it was just like, okay, I got this, and I will do it your way because that's what you asked of me. So in that moment, that wasn't about Batman. I think what Andy had alluded to about Batman coming to the realization in that moment, in that final joke, in that final scene, that there was no saving him was definitely a come to understanding moment for the Bat. However, that finality was fully for the respect that he had for Commissioner Gordon and what had happened to his daughter. So, but again, though, that speaks to reason of multiple interpretations, multiple ways you can take this story, multiple directions you can take this story, and just how in a few short pages it just really encapsulates this larger than life story.
Yeah, because one of the few things that I originally remember when I first read the book was when Joker tells Batman the joke and how they both end up laughing. And as Andy said, the light goes out. It's like, what's going on here? Like, are they now like realizing that it's not that they're enemies? Like, are they actually somewhat realizing that there is more in common than they thought they had and now they're buddies? You know, like, what is this? Because you see, what's so interesting is you know that it's good versus evil, but what's so interesting is how one cannot live without the other. And there's only there's very few scenarios where one can live without the other and how you can interpret it. And one of them is like, you love somebody so much, you want to hold on to that person, you want to remember not just bad things, you want to remember good things. So it's just, again, I think that's what makes Alan Moore just a great writer, because it's just like you throw that book down not in frustration, but you finish reading that story for the first time and it just makes you think, like, what is this, what's the meaning of this final scene, like what are we getting here, you know?
And I feel differently about it as time goes by, and depending on the day, you know, to misquote the Joker, I like my feelings to be multiple choice. um I mean, I think even on this channel, I've probably had different interpretations of this, because like the Killing Joke has been brought up at different times. Obviously, today I feel that the interpretation that Batman kills the Joker at the end is patently absurd. I know there are days where I look at it and I go, "That's definitely what happened." Um, Today is not one of those days. Today is a day where I think Batman gives up, is what that ending is. But I think the one thing in every reading of the very end that I think is undeniable is a sense of commonality, and at the very, even more than that, a sense of kinship
Yes.
between the two of them. I
And
think
it's weird to
any
think that.
interpretation of the ending must include the realization that they laugh together in that ending. Um, you know, and again, people can come away with that very, very vague, you know, textless back half of the final page, what they want to see in that moment. But I think that, I think it has to involve a recognition of the commonality between the two of them. I'm also going to comment on one other thing, and this will be some sacrilege, and that I'm going to let the animated version of this inform something that I'm going to
No, I
say.
wanted to bring that up
Um,
too. Don't worry.
which which is that there's a scene they add in the animated version, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there's more scenes like in the fun house with Commissioner Gordon in the animated version of this, and one of them is this kind of faux court where Jim's sanity is sort of being put on trial, and they're discussing what sounds like his relationship with the Joker. Need to stop him, this person can't be allowed to go on. And it's revealed they're talking about Batman. And the idea is that James Gordon's connection to Batman is patently absurd and undercuts everything he says about being someone who does things by the book. So, Cami, when you mentioned specifically that scene where Jim says, "I want him brought in, I want him done by the book. Do you hear me?" The book. Um, I, even though obviously that scene is not in the comic, the idea of it comes from somewhere that I think is in kind of the thinking that went into the writing. And I find that scene so interesting now that I can no longer escape that interpretation from the animated film, because I think you're entirely right that he really is saying what he is saying, which is show him that we are better than him. Do this by the book to show that our way is the right way. But there is this, maybe the film makes it too obvious, but I just think there's something that we can pepper in there, which is, what in the hell is Commissioner Gordon and Batman's way that is by the book that we're supposed to be following. Because like I mean, what's the story, Steve? Maybe you even know what's the one where it's revealed where like Commissioner Gordon is not allowed to turn on the bat signal. Like he has like some assistant who's not a cop. There's some interpretation of the story where he's like by legal red tape he can't work with Batman, so he's not allowed to turn on the light. I forget which story that is. But you know, it's Batman is completely outside the law, and the idea is bring him in by the book the way we do it. That's crazy. Batman doesn't do anything by the book.
Well, that's the thing I wanted to tell you,
It's
Andy.
funny.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Why
No,
aren't you
that's the
laughing?
thing.
Right? It's funny.
No, but that's
that's
what I'm
the idea.
saying. The animated film, you know, I know that there's a lot of people that will unpack that movie 3 ways from Sunday, and we're not going to do that here. But if you focus on the part that is directly adapted from the graphic novel, there's one thing that I remember, and Cami, you and I will talk about this next year, God willing, when we finally get around to discussing Justice League: The New Frontier. When the late Darwin Cook was alive and they interviewed him, the thing that he loved the most about the animated adaptation of his graphic novel is the beauty of animation is we get to live between the panels. We get from point A to point B in the panel, and in animation we get to see how we got there in certain ways, in certain shapes and forms. So I feel that that's one of the big positives that we can take away from the animated film. I think the other positives that we could take away from the animated film is the fact that the song gets a tune. I kind of love the fact that because that's probably one of the weirdest things. If someone reads this book for the first time, I think I don't know what my first time reaction was, but I swear to God, anybody could be reading this book and start looking at this, and someone would say, "Holy shit, is he singing? Is he actually singing?" So the fact that we get the lyrics, we get the tune, and it actually makes more sense. That's again the beauty of animation. But of course, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill working together. You wouldn't expect anything more, anything less. And I think that them giving those iconic voices life to the Killing Joke makes that final scene all the more unsettling and frustrating to a great many people. In a great way, though. Please let me say that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Brian Boland or John Higgins that said it, but they brought it to my attention, and I just can't unsee it in that final panel where Batman had just listened to the Joker finish the finality of the joke, and you have those dots behind them. Well, one would assume that they're just lights, maybe, but he alludes to the fact that it's a patrol car. So, despite seeing that nearly the last scene where he's kind of like choking him out or whatever, I think that was just his final frustration, but I still think he handed him over to the authorities. And then the lights out was kind of like the patrol car goes away or whatever, like they threw him in the patrol car and took him off to Arkham or whatever they were going to do with them. But I don't know, in a way, I just, despite what you said, Andy, about there not being really a definitive line of Batman's sanity of doing things by the book, because obviously he is a vigilante, um I do think there is some morality there, and I think that we owe that to Commissioner Gordon. I think in a lot of ways, the rules that he has to follow in some way kind of rub off on Batman. And despite the fact that he really doesn't have to follow that protocol or those rules, I think in a way it kind of keeps them in line, or even going over the line, testing those waters, because he deals with some really sadistic and sinister situations, and I think it's very easy to cross over to the dark side. And I think every time he has a conversation with a character like the Joker, you really do see that fine line of Batman can go either way. And I think that sometimes his moral compass just comes back to those conversations that he has with Gordon, like, okay, I'm not going to play into these words, I'm not going to play into these feelings, I'm going to do what's right here, and we're going to go back the other way. I don't know, I guess in a way it's just kind of, again, you want all the stories to end on a happy note. It's again, it's all left up to
And
interpretation.
I think you're right, Cami, in that what I'm saying about the absurdity of the line, in that obviously Batman doesn't follow the book. Like, what is this commonality of our way? Like, there's an easy answer here, which is good, right? That the story can still be good versus evil in the do it our way. What Commissioner Gordon really means in that moment is the way of quote unquote the good. So I don't think it diminishes anything about what he's saying necessarily. I'm just saying that there there's depth to that line though, in that, well, yes, their way is the way of the good, and I think it would be crazy to read Batman and not think that Batman and Commissioner Gordon are good, and like the history of the stories that they're on the path of some sort of justice. I do think that just the way it's presented by saying it do it our way by the book just does make the reader think that's crazy. And that's the thing, and that's what I think the quote unquote moral, but the theme of the story is that's encapsulated by the end of the absurdity of an inmate trying to help the other. They're both in the asylum, right? And so even it takes nothing away from one of them being the good and one of them being the bad, is what I kind of want to make clear about how I'm framing this, because they are. There's a good and there's a bad, but they are both in the asylum being good and being bad. And I just think that it's kind of thrown in our face if we like really put a microscope up to the idea of by the book being Batman's way somehow, because it's not. So it's interesting.
I often say that though in reality, because if you think of a prison situation where you have a prison guard who, you know, manages the inmates, really isn't the prison guard himself a prisoner? You know, I mean, at some point, years of that position in that profession is going to cause a sense of gray lines and morality. And I think this is really where we lie in our social justice theories today, and facts in some cases, where there is a good cop, a bad cop, you know, a good criminal, a bad criminal. But again, that's why we read these stories, because they do mimic real life, and it allows us to be safe in these pages. It allows us to kind of toy with the insanity and go to sleep comfortably at night. You know, we might have nightmares. I mean, I can't say I didn't go to sleep last night having dreams of the Avengers. I have no idea why, but you know, these things do happen. But in any event, regardless of whether it be this story or any other good bad story, you will have the line of good, you will have the line of evil, and in some cases that blurred line crosses so finite and so gray that you really don't know what you feel. You know, you don't there are times, and I hate to say it, this is why I always question my own sanity when I'm reading. It's like sometimes I do want the bad guy to win because I see their point. Sometimes I understand the why behind the reason they started doing what they did. And I know that sounds really strange, but you guys know I read a lot of, you know, crazy stories in the world of horror, and sometimes it just seems right. Sometimes it doesn't seem so far-fetched and crazy. So in a case like this, you know, we want Batman to win because I guess that's really what we're all about here, is the hero in the story. But I think sometimes after planting yourself in these types of stories again and again, you do hold a sense of compassion for a character like the Joker, because you understand why he is the way he is. And if that makes me a bad person, so be it. But I think that just makes me human.
I think we pretty much covered all the bases here. I guess the last thing that we can really discuss is something that you brought up earlier, Andy, and I think that that's something that we should, because, you know, we're Batman fans, and this is an important question, and that is the Killing Joke canon? I will say that to a certain degree, in certain ways, every piece of Batman's lore is canon. And the reason why I say that is because every person that gets the opportunity to create a Batman story, a brand new Batman story, what does they do first? They reflect on the past. They take a look at everything that has come before them, and they will, if the opportunity is there, find ways to incorporate their work with the icons that came before them. I think one of the funniest things is if there was any one story that I've read in recent years that can truly give us the definitive answer of if this story is canon or not, is Jeff Johns' The Three Jokers. But then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other people will say, well, is The Three Jokers really canon? You know, like, it's one of those really great conversations that people can have. But no, I mean, the events of The Killing Joke have been featured in particularly Batgirl's events have been featured in the comics so many times. I mean, if it wasn't for the Killing Joke, we wouldn't have Oracle, and we wouldn't have the miraculous way how Batgirl got to walk again. They referenced the Killing Joke in the Joker War story that was written by James Tynion IV a couple of years back. So, yeah, I think that everything in Batman lore is canon, and that includes The Dark Knight Returns, even though you really can't think about the past in regards to a Batman future story, but you can definitely pick story points and writing styles and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's canon. I truly do. At this point in time, it's impossible for it not to be.
Well, that's the beauty of future Batman stories, or really any comic story, is that all characters have an origin, and all new writers had started somewhere, and what impacted them to become an artist or a colorist or a writer themselves, and how is that going to impact the story that they create? Because you can't just create something from originality. I mean, there is no more Stan Lees in the world because all of these characters are in existence.
They're
But
here.
to see the beauty that comes, well, I don't want to misspeak though. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't be a new creator and come up with something new. I just mean in reference to characters that are already in existence and have such a depth like Batman. But we're seeing beautiful things from indie comics, of course.
Of
However,
course.
when we see future Batman stories, we're always going to be impacted by the past because that particular writer and creator is giving us their interpretation of what impacted them the most, being introduced to, the storyline as a whole.
I mean, I can give you a perfect example. I mean, I mentioned the Three Jokers. Jeff Johns and Jason Fabok gave us a brilliant 3-issue story, and it was a very praised book. I mean, I love the fact that, Cammy, you just recently picked up Joker the World, and apparently there is an epilogue of the Three Jokers in that book. Jason Fabok and Jeff Johns. I got the
That
little
book does
three.
not get enough love. It does not, honestly. I mean, I can understand why it doesn't resonate with everybody, but to see and that's kind of what I just alluded to see the interpretation of Batman, how he's impacted creators in different points of the world is just so awesome. I mean, why that doesn't get more attention is beyond me. It's just
And
a
then
really cool way to see it. And now we have the Joker of the world too.
well, that's what I was talking about. Joker the World is where Jason Fabok and Jeff Johns got back together to make an epilogue for the Three Jokers in that book, which I thought was really,
Oh,
really
sorry.
nice.
I went
And
the other way because I'm trying to give
you want
Batman
Batman the
attention,
World to
Batman
be
the
read
world's
by more
attention.
people. Yes.
See,
That's
it's
your
always
ultimate,
about me and
that's
what
your
I want
life
to talk
goal.
about.
And then you can take a look at a story I think Andy might have frozen.
Oh, I hope not. I
Oh,
still see
just
you
weren't
guys.
oh, I can hear you. You just your picture is just not moving, sir.
Okay, well, all that
No,
really
he
matters
was
is
just not moving. He was
Yeah.
all that really
perfectly
matters is what I
still.
have to say. Literally, all that
But
matters is what I say. But
but
I just
wait. I'm so sorry. I just got to
go
finish this
for it.
thought. And then there is a person like Chip Zdarsky who just recently wrote Joker Year One, 3 issues of Batman, his current Batman run, and it was panned beyond reprieve. And I will say, as someone who read that story arc and does appreciate Chip Zdarsky, I really did not enjoy that story at all. I thought it was horribly written and completely unnecessary. But again, one of the few things that you said, Cammy, I just want to piggyback on that. And then, Andy, I want you to finish your thought. We have a lot of stuff from the past, but nowadays, when it comes to a new writer taking over the franchise, it's about them making it theirs. That's really what it is at this point. Just you gotta do the very best that you can. Some people can do it, some people can't. But you know what?
And
That's
not
what
even
it's all
just
about.
not even just making it theirs, but also making it relevant to the times, because as
Exactly.
we do look back, there's just so many elements of these stories that speak to a certain period of time or a certain war, or, something prolific that's happening in our history. And just our last conversation that we had, Steve, you and I were kind of just a little bit offset in Batman the First Night about talking about political things, showing their and rearing their head in comics. But it made me take a step back, because social commentary is really a very strong thing that happens in comic books. And I think that sometimes we get annoyed, and I think you and I are just kind of a little bit more on edge when it comes to it, because we've had so much of that in our face in the last 4 or 5 years that it's just so much. And when we read our comic books, we want to escape, but you can't escape it. And even when
Well,
you go back and you look at comics of yesteryear, they weren't escaping it either. It might have not just been, as in your face as it sometimes can be or sometimes can feel nowadays. I just think right now you and I are oversaturated. And so we're just really old and bitter about it. But I do think social commentary is a very nuanced thing. I do think it's a very real thing, and I do think it really plays into comic books and the history of comics. So I
no,
just think maybe
Kenny,
we
you're
should not
right.
say that.
No, you're absolutely right. But once again, I think the issue that I had with the First Night was putting modern day politic ideals in a period piece that takes place before those kinds
Oh,
of ideas
I
happened. That was my issue
under,
with that book. I had
understood.
no
I again,
issue. Trust me, the whole story and legacy of X-Men is completely social commentary. I will say that if you seriously do not think that X-Men is social commentary, you you are just weird beyond repair. And I don't know, you are worse off than the Joker. You are totally broken.
well, it's a good thing then that I misinterpreted what you said, because it made me go on my own discovery and just kind of realize that I misspoke on my own behalf, because I think I was making it about more of just social commentary in general versus not fitting the piece, as you had said. But it did make me take a look back and a look at myself. So now when I look at comics and when social commentary is introduced or something happening, obviously I'll still be critical if it doesn't fit the narrative or if it doesn't quite fit the story, but I won't be so critical as to say I just don't want it in there, because then that's just kind of selfish of me. I mean, what is
No,
the purpose of writing? What is it the purpose to be a writer if you can't express yourself?
I know we
If people
totally
were
cut.
constantly being
Yeah,
stifled, we wouldn't have the joyous or the horrific stories that we have in some cases.
yeah,
But
I know.
yeah, I guess I'm just correcting myself in that instance, and I just tied you into it. So if you're gonna get on the Titanic, Steve, with me, you're get ready to go down. That's all I'm saying.
No, I'm sorry. I know that we've been keeping Andy from saying something, but I think Andy needs to be brought up to speed here. Yeah. So when we discussed Dan Jurgens' Batman: The First Night, which is a great story, the part that really angered me was the fact that you're talking about a story that takes place in 1939, and someone mentions America First politics. I'm just like, why are you talking about something that was created in 2016 in 1939? That just doesn't make sense to me. That's all that I said.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. Science fiction is all about the time it was in, and obviously we're talking about a historical thing. So I guess you could read it differently, but I'll leave no comment there since I haven't actually read it.
Yeah, you should though. You
That's
you
my
really should. It's a great
I
book.
I will. I mean, it's Dan Jurgens. It's gonna be
It's
worth reading.
great. It's fantastic.
The thing I'll jump in and say is where you guys ended up going was more interesting. So I didn't particularly care to need to wait on this, but to the question of canon is just what I was going to say before, and I really wanted you guys to get through that because it mattered more. But I guess I'll just say, since I already kind of mentioned something about canon earlier on in the discussion, um, I think that this story is 100% everything that appears on the pages and is said is canon asterisk. And what I mean by that is I believe that all the images we see, all of the words that are spoken really happened. in terms of the like Joker history, that really is one of his multiple choice paths that he thinks of sometimes. Is it the past? Well, that's intentionally ambiguous, so it's still canon in that he thinks that sometimes. I do think that. Obviously, Barbara really got shot. There is Oracle in, the mainline Batman comics following this, so there's that element. And then at the end of the story, Batman and the Joker really laugh together. Batman and the Joker really stop laughing. The lights really turn off. The question that is left there is, what did Alan Moore want us to take from that and their thoughts in the moment? I think that the stuff that's left off the page at the end is what's most interesting. And that's the part that isn't canon, because that's the part that is not just the physical material in front of us that presents canon. So like I said, there are days where I think one thing about it, there's days where I think another thing about it. We're currently in I think the cycle breaks there of Batman trying to help the Joker. I don't think anything breaks about what will happen. But I think part of the breaking cycle there is Batman realizes the absurdity of it. Does that continue into the mainline comics? No. But again, that's an interpretation of what we're seeing off the page at the end, not a canonical event in the story. So I almost hate to end it there because it feels trite in comparison. But it is important to talk about the canon of the story, because a lot of the stuff we talk about on this channel is new readers, or what people should read next, or why we like a story. And I think it's just kind of important to let people know that, like, generally speaking, the events of this story happened. And if you go and read other Batman stuff, you can have the Killing Joke in the back of your mind and be like, Batman and the Joker really have this history that really happened to Barbara, all of that. But maybe the thing you should take with a grain of salt, if you're like a new comic reader reading this and now going to read like Detective Comics starting post Crisis, is that like maybe the absurd cycle is something Alan Moore was commenting on, but continues and didn't break magically when this book was published.
I will definitely say in conclusion, the thing about Alan Moore that makes him so special is the fact that this was like his first big book that he wrote after Watchmen, and the fact that it resonates with so many people. Like, again, I didn't take the opportunity to take a look at his entire life's work and see when books like V for Vendetta or When From Hell came out. I mean, I know that pre-Watchmen is Miracle Man, but for him to get the opportunity, see, what makes him so special to me is the fact that he got the opportunity to tackle two of the greatest heroes in all of DC Comics. He got to do the Killing Joke, and he got to do Superman, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And both of those stories, brief, thought-provoking, to the point, canon, and he just gives a unique perspective on these lores. And I think that that's why people look at Alan Moore as one of the greatest writers of all time, and rightfully so. So I think that that's going to wrap up another great discussion here for Batman's 85th anniversary. I mean, I think, could this possibly be our best yet? I'm not sure. I have to rewatch all the other episodes. But as far as I'm concerned, thank you guys for joining us. This was absolutely an amazing discussion. Andy, Cammy, it's always a pleasure to just tear Batman lore apart and just look at it under a microscope, because some of the conversations that I have with you guys, and I mean this deeply, I come in these conversations with a purpose, and I have no idea where they're going to go. And some of the things that I end up saying, some of the things that you guys end up saying, it still blows my mind about some of the directions that we go in. And that's what makes this channel, and that's what makes these conversations so, so special. So I hope you all appreciated that. Leave a comment, leave a like. We'd love to talk to you guys. Hit that notification bell to subscribe to the channel so you're up to date for the latest content. There's more coming, guys, and we're hoping that those of you who have gotten to this point with us, that you will be with us for the final two celebratory episodes of the 85th anniversary of Batman. But until then, everybody, we'll see you in the next one.